Welcome to Audible Insights, brought to you by the Insights Association and hosted by David Paul, founder of Dialsmith and Lillian Labs.
We're coming to you live from the Insights Association's Corporate Researchers Conference in Orlando, and I am joined on this episode by Menaka Gopinath, who's the president of the Communities and Social Intelligence Practices at Ipsos. Menaka, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your world working in communities and social intelligence for such a large research company, and I'm assuming with some really large and impressive brands.
Sure. Yeah, it's been really fun. I've been at Ipsos for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was working in communities. I've actually worked in communities most of my career. And that includes online communities that were really the precursor to what is now known as social media. So it's kind of been my career through line, whether I meant it or not. But when I was brought into Ipsos, it was really to build that practice up at Ipsos. So it was, an emerging capability in the broader research industry. And they were looking forward and realized that this is something they really needed to own. So it's been great. I think it's interesting to see how we can bridge the capabilities of what we can do in community and with social data with a lot of the frameworks and rigor that Ipsos has developed over 40 plus years. Yeah. So that's been super cool.
And I imagine over 8 years, this must have evolved tremendously from when you started.
Oh, yeah. And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit in my session later. But I think with social intelligence specifically, it's now called social intelligence, not social listening, which people still use that term. But the reality is you don't have to just look at a small subset of the data. You can look at the full corpus. You're able to use machine learning and artificial intelligence. So it's super robust in terms of what you can do with that data set. And the cool thing is you can also double click into it and see that verbatim and that rich qualitative insight as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what's your presentation about today?
So I'm presenting with my Coca-Cola client, Raul Ponce, and we're talking about a project we did together last year where he came to us, had a segmentation that they do at Coca-Cola around what they call drinking moments, and they just felt that it needed a little bit more richness and human depth. And so we essentially leveraged social data, social conversation data, and we're going to talk about how we approach that to kind of bring more meaning to the moments so that they could really have some business activation against that.
Oh, that's interesting. So for those listening who aren't at CRC and able to make it to your presentation, can you summarize some of the highlights of what you'll be talking about, and if there are any particular outcomes that you'll be talking about, takeaways that you can leave us with?
Yeah, sure. I think the three key areas that we're going to be talking about is one, why social data is such a rich data set to leverage in your insight strategies and why it shouldn't be looked at as an afterthought. Because I think a lot of times everyone's like, oh, let's add some social listening in there, let's optional social intelligence project. So really why you should be more strategic in how you leverage social data. So that's a big piece of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the actual case study and how we approached it from an analytics perspective. So I'm going to actually showcase the mapping that we did with the social data. So it's essentially doing perceptual mapping. So if people are familiar with quantitative market landscape work, same idea, but with unstructured data. So we'll talk about that. And then Raul's going to really talk about how he activated on the learning and how it made a difference at Coca-Cola and really provide a nice kind of framework for how organizations can approach incorporating social data more intelligently into their organizations.
Yeah. Are you able to touch on what the key findings were for him and how he deployed those? For those who
I think so, high level. I think some of the things that he was able to learn are, one of the things was when you do a segmentation, it's usually very focused on the product or the category that the client is in, right? And so a lot of times you miss kind of the things around it, like the adjacencies. And so, for example, one of the moments, I think was like relaxing screen time. And, obviously people are usually drinking at something when they're watching Netflix or whatever. But I think we started to see the types of things that people were really talking about in those moments. And they actually used those to activate on partnerships, retail activations,
that's really smart.
things like that. Yeah.
That's really exciting. Well, hopefully some of you listening are able to make it and learn more about that. And otherwise, I hope this summary leaves you with a little something. As before I let you go, what I would like to leave listeners with, someone with your depth and experience, is what's going on in the research space and in your work right now that you wish people were talking more about, that you really think just needs a spotlight shined on it? If someone were to go to work tomorrow and just put a little bit more attention or rigor toward one key thing, someone were asking you for advice in the hallway, what's that one key thing that you'd say?
Using social intelligence. No, well, I think, I don't know if I can pinpoint one specific thing, but I would say that I think that it's, while people talk a lot about wanting to be consumer-centric, I don't always see that play out in how people approach insights. So I think people fall back, and I'm generalizing right now, it's not everyone, but I think there's a tendency to fall back on what you know and doing things you've always done, even though you're saying you want to be more consumer-centric. So I think a lot of the methods, like for me, my background is in marketing. I didn't start in research, so I've always approached how I think about insights from that marketing perspective, where you think about the consumer or the person, really. And that is what I think social intelligence is really strong at, is it is fully generated by the consumer. Like, we're not curating or driving that conversation. That dialogue is pure organic. So the richness and depth you can get from that is incredibly valuable. And I think it gets undervalued really often.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. Good luck with your presentation this afternoon, and thanks for giving us a few minutes of your time today. I enjoyed it.
Cool. Yeah, it was nice to meet you.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find all our episodes by searching Audible Insights on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and by visiting insightsassociation.org/audible. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.